So Regional Housing developed this guide that's really intended for tenants and their advocates. It's not an intensive, an in-depth legal analysis of LIHTC, and I will mention for those lawyers on the call that the National Housing Law Project does have an advocate's guide for LIHTC that you can get more information on. But this is really an attempt to demystify the program that is confusing. We originally had in the title renting a low-income housing tax credit home and switched it out because it was confusing to tenants who wanted to know how they get their tax credit. This is not a tax credit for tenants. It's a tax credit for developers as an incentive to develop apartments that are below market rent. And we organize it in a question and answer format that we hope is easy to understand. I will say that LIHTC is the largest source of financing for the development of affordable apartments, but it is very different from HUD programs. It's actually not run by Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's an IRS program because it's a tax credit program. Now, the program does use a lot of HUD guidance and regulations, but it is an IRS program. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim to tell you how to find a LIHTC apartment.
Yes, thanks, Cindy.
Closer to the mic, Kim.
Okay, yes, is that better? I'll be leaning over like this. All right, can people hear me? If you can't hear me, just yell and I'll speak more loudly. All right, so LIHTC, as we said, can be really complicated. I was a practicing lawyer when I joined Regional Housing in 2005 and started to do LIHTC, and it took me really several years to start to really understand the program. And if you I find the internet is a boon, and it's also a curse, because if you type in LIHTC in Google, you could find a lot of resources about it. I mean, there's a whole cottage industry of people who make their living on LIHTC. I guess I could be one of them. So, but there's a lot. Yeah, I mean, you could watch endless videos on YouTube about how these deals are financed and put together with charts and arrows. And so the purpose of this webinar isn't to give you that, it's to just give an overview and really from the tenant's perspective. So, okay, so let me, and I can drone on about how a project is financed, but I'm going to skip that for the purpose of this meeting. But unless somebody has a real interest, then we can go back to it. So anyway, so how do you find a LIHTC apartment on the guide? So really the first place to start is with PHFA, and that stands for the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, which many of you may already be familiar with. Well, what is a housing finance agency? Every state has one. They're called different things. In Delaware, I think it's called the State Housing Authority, but every state has one, and it's basically the gatekeeper at the state level to promote affordable housing in a lot of ways. It's their mission is to expand housing opportunities for low-income people. And somebody mentioned that they do mostly home ownership. That's one of the things that PHFA does. They have affordable mortgages for lower income people. They have housing programs that support lower income affordable housing. But for our purposes, here, PHFA is the gatekeeper for LIHTC. So as in every state. So as Cindy mentioned, LIHTC is a treasury program. It's the treasury runs it. They allocate federal tax credits to every state based on their population. And the gatekeeper of who gets of how those tax credits are allocated to particular projects is the State Housing Finance Agency, PHFA. And that's where the thing that's called a QAP, or a Qualified Allocation Plan, a QAP, comes into play. Every state basically lists the priorities for investment in affordable housing, and developers see that QAP, or qualified allocation plan, as a Bible for submitting their applications to get those tax credits, which in turn finance their development. So PHFA is the gatekeeper of many things affordable housing in Pennsylvania, but particularly the LIHTC program. So let me turn back to the guide. So if you look at the guide, on page 4, and I guess we can email a copy of this to everybody or give you a link. And there are links in the guide where you can click to go to their hot links that'll direct you to places that the guide refers you to. And the first, yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to go there.
Yeah. All right. So the first paragraph talks about the best place to find a list of all the tax credit properties in Pennsylvania is this link at the PHFA website. And so if you click on that, if you go down to the very bottom of this, see, the PHFA website is a little bit hard to navigate if you're not familiar with it, but if you are, it becomes more familiar the more you use it. So at the very bottom, you'll see that directory of multifamily housing, and then you can search for LIHTC developments by county. So you just clicked on Montgomery.
And now I have to go back to to my PDFs.
Oh, okay.
Which is, I think, this. Can you see that now?
Yeah. So
you see the list from PHFA?
Yeah. So actually, I'm going to make my screen larger here so I can. Okay. Yeah. So here's a list of Philadelphia tax credit, and there's also other PHFA administered funding. So it's basically a comprehensive list of that. It's not all of the affordable housing in Philadelphia, but it's a good start. So if you take a look at, you'll see the boxes there. It'll check whether there's LIHTC involved. As you can see, many of these have more than one funding source than just LIHTC. They'll have Penn Homes money, which is basically federal home dollars. Fair money, which is the state realty transfer tax that was passed, in part due to the great advocacy of Cindy, and we're getting we got a state realty transfer tax fund to help support affordable housing. But so this is basically a list of all the tax credit properties in Philadelphia County. If you scroll to the
I'm sorry. Here we go. Well, back here. Here we go.
And if you scroll to the bottom of this list, go to the very bottom. So you see there's quite a number of them here in Philly. If you scroll to the bottom, it'll tell you what's on tap for which have already gotten allocations but are in the process of being financed or built. So this is also this is a good list, because a lot of the developments that we've seen already and that have been built are full, and they have waiting lists that are either closed or full, or they're long waiting lists. So these are projects that are going to be coming online in the next year. So so the waiting lists haven't filled up just yet. So it's good if this is a good place to look for things that are coming online. Okay. There's also another, if you go back to the guide, there's the PAHousingSearch.com. It's another more comprehensive website. It's more consumer friendly place to look. Yeah, so there you go. So, and this, you can refine your search a little bit more by narrowing the area, narrowing a zip code. You can change it based on specialized information, specialized units. The Gala here, I worked on that. Gala, that's actually very close to my house. You can specialize information will tell you if you click on you can't tell from this listing, but if you click on it and go through, you can see whether it's a tax credit property. Yeah, they have do not get scammed. Important. So there, here on this is
someplace it says go down further. Okay. Tax credit.
Yeah, this is a tax credit property, and it's seniors only. So that's another thing to look for. All right.
And let me just mention, PA Housing Search is not just about LIHTC. So it's designed to show all subsidized housing or affordable housing as long as the owner enters the information.
Yeah, and it's funded through PHFA. There's a link on their website, I believe, but yes, that's definitely true. So other ways to figure out if a particular property is a tax credit property, well, you can ask the property manager. They should know. I mean, there's property managers, as you know, that specialize in tax credit compliance, which is a very regulatory intense area, and there's very specific rules, so that the property manager will know whether it's a tax credit property or not. You can also ask to see the client's lease, because the lease should have an addendum, a low-income housing tax credit lease addendum, and there it is. PHFA requires this. We've worked with tax credit owners to make sure that this is attached to every lease. That hasn't been true in the past, but every tax credit property should have this, and it's this addendum, and it sets forth what certain special rights are of tenants in the tax credit program. Okay, so unless anybody has any questions about that, we can talk about applying for and qualifying for LIHTC. All right, so who qualifies to live in LIHTC housing? Well, it's basically like any other applying for any other apartment, except for one thing: you can't make more than the maximum income. And I'll talk about that in a minute.
Can I ask a brief question about the website? How often are those websites updated? I've used that website, the consumer-friendly one, in the past, and sent clients out, and maybe it's because others are moving quickly, but my client would contact the management and there wouldn't be anything available, even though the website showed that there were available units.
Yeah. My personal experience, and I'm not a PHFA spokesperson, is that the first one that we showed you is probably the best, most updated frequently, because that's updated at least once a year. The other one, I think, relies and depends upon landlords to voluntarily update it, and when they don't, PHFA needs to reach out, and that often doesn't happen. So for me, even though it's a smaller set of apartments, the first link, the PHFA, is updated a lot more regularly. I mean, if there are particular complaints that you have about properties that have misinformation, we can certainly forward that to let PHFA know that, to update it.
All right. Thank you.
Do you have anything else to add on that, Cindy?
No, just that people often do, you have to get onto waiting lists. So it's frustrating if it shows availability and then the apartment's gone, but important to get on waiting lists, and we'll talk about that a little bit too.
And for me, it's also frustrating when the waiting lists are always closed. I mean, that's a problem that a lot of our clients have a lot of times. So
yeah. So
you have to you have to be on top of that. So I would definitely say that the first list is best. And let me just commend to you the list of developments that are coming online. As you can see, in Philadelphia, it's a lot. In Montgomery County, maybe it's much. I looked at it, maybe there's 2 or 3 there. So there's the ones that are coming online with new units are ones that you really should have people jump on. Okay. Anything else on that? No. All right. So the application process is like really any other application process for tenancy, except that there's a maximum income. So LIHTC properties, they establish minimum reasonable eligible criteria. Like you have to have some income. So a lot of times our clients, for example, it'll be a church, and they partner with a for-profit developer to create 60 units of senior housing next door to the church, and then they realized when their parishioners and senior citizens are trying to get in, that they don't have enough income to get in, because the landlord, the owner, needs to see that there's some kind of minimum income that's going to support the tenant's ability to pay rent. So there's that. There's minimum credit scores, and we can talk about that a little bit more later. They do background checks as well, and I'll get into that a little bit later. There may be rules about household size. There's a maximum household size for units. A lot of times, you'll see one bedroom and studio apartments, but some family developments will have 2 and 3 bedrooms, although those are rare. So if you have a big a family or a client with a big family, it's going to be harder to find units with more bedrooms. PHFA has tried to address that by giving developers points for having bigger apartments for bigger families, but that's also something to keep in mind. And the converse of that, I mean, you can't have a single person in a 3-bedroom. That's so the manager will take a look at that when reviewing an application. There's also LIHTC buildings are allowed to give priority to certain populations, special needs populations, veterans, people, youth aging out of foster care, people who are in danger of becoming homeless or formerly homeless, and recently PHFA allowed or put in a special gave points to developers who have units for returning citizens. In fact, I'm working on a development in Harrisburg that we hope to close soon, which has 8 units for returning citizens. So this will all be laid out in the tenant selection plan, which you should get from the property manager to see how they reserve units. There's also units for people with disabilities. They get special priority for accessible units and for also hearing impaired. So that's also something to keep in mind. So there is, I know we have, I'm sure many of you may be familiar with the Fair Housing Act and the protected classes. There are age, you can't discriminate on the basis of age, except there's you can't reject someone on the basis of age as to get into an apartment, but there's an exception carved out for 55 and 62 and over developments. So that's another thing to look at. Make sure that the clients that I got a call maybe 6 months ago from somebody who was interested in getting their brother into an apartment building that had just opened up in Willow Grove and was about to open up in Willow Grove. And then she got all online. She was there on the first day and then was disappointed to find out that it was 62 and over and her brother was only 55. So that's another thing to be aware of. There are also special rules for students. Generally speaking, when the program was set up, it was not designed to be student housing or transient housing. So there are rules for students that we can get into. If everybody in the household is a full-time student, then that can be an issue for your client unless they fall into certain exceptions, which we can get into later. All right, so let me go back to why this program is different from your typical market rate rental housing. Well, there's the income limit, and the income limit essentially is defined by reference to the area median income, which is often abbreviated as AMI. So every county or metropolitan area has an AMI limit. It varies based on the family size and the county that you're in. There we go. Here's Philadelphia. So this is actually pretty helpful. This guide. So this is on PHFA's website. One of the things,
and there is we have a link.
Yeah, there's a link to it
later in the guide. I'll get to.
Yeah. And because trying to find it yourself is a little bit like finding a needle in a haystack. But if you want to find the area median income, this is the PHFA website is the place to go, because if you just Google area median income, you're going to get all sorts of junk that may or may not apply. So this shows you what it is in 2022 in Philadelphia. If you look on the left-hand side, the 1054, that's the median income for a family of 4 as of April 2022. And so this breaks, the first part of this chart breaks it up into household size. It tells you what the limit would be. So as you can see, there's percentage of median. So LIHTC is designed to serve people at various income levels. There'll be some units in a building that'll be at 20% AMI. Usually it's a very small number. There'll be some units at 30% AMI. There'll be some units at 50 and 60% AMI. Generally speaking, 60% AMI is the limit for a lot of these developments. In 2017, the legislation, the federal legislation changed and allowed some developers to go up to 80% AMI, as long as they would balance it and provide more units for people at 20 and 30%. But the rules there are complicated, and they're changing, and they just actually announced a clarification to the rules. So generally speaking, a lot of developers don't do that. They just cap it at 60% AMI. So let's see. So as we said, AMI varies depending on the county, the size of your household. It changes every year. And so, so usually in April of every year, HUD will publish new guidelines, and PHFA will publish a new chart. Let's see. So, and then if the exact breakdown of units, like how many units are at 60% AMI in this apartment complex, how many are at 50, how many are 20 or 30, the property manager should be able to furnish that information to you as an advocate, and to your tenant as well. Okay. Are there any questions about that?
We're going to get into a discussion of setting rents, but just on qualifying, any questions?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Cindy has the wonderful task of explaining the money, which you really.
I have a question about the expiration of the tax credits. How long is, when do they expire, and what happens to the tenant who is in a tax credit property and there's an expiration? And we have a situation in Chester County where there's an expiration. They're converting the property to on-site Section 8, and the tenant is being told that they are not going to be qualified for Section 8 because they have, a significantly higher income, and they've been in the property, a tax credit property, for over 20 years. So, I mean, wow. Yes. So, any comments or assistance you can provide would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Cindy, you can jump in, but my understanding is that when the properties are at the end of their compliance period, it's usually 30 years. If we're talking about properties that are coming offline now, right now properties that that's changed to now 40 years, but it's probably their end of their 30-year compliance period. So under the tax credit rules, an owner is not allowed to evict someone for 3 years after it comes offline. So what you need to know is find out when that 3 years starts. When is the end of the compliance period, and figuring that out it can be often complicated if the owner is not going to tell you when it is, because you need to see when. You might have to actually go through the land record. That's another way to tell if you have a tax credit property. You check the records, and you see if there's a PHFA indenture, restricted covenant, and you'll see a bunch of mortgages that are on there. So that will give you some guidance for when the compliance period expires. Generally speaking, it's usually 30 years. The 30-year clock doesn't start ticking until the end of construction. So it's usually a year after the PHFA indenture is filed. But yeah, their rules, they can't evict someone just because they're over income for that 3-year period. So they'll have 3 years to find another place to live. If that's not happening in your development and people are getting pushed out earlier, then you need to be represented, and that needs to be brought to the attention of the landlord. Now, I don't know if there are, Cindy, are there special rules if it's converting to a Section 8 property? I don't think that there are.
I don't know. I really don't know.
I think the issue is they're rehabbing the property and they're asking all the tenants to leave, which is going to put them in a tough situation.
Carolyn, I would suggest you take a look at the National Housing Law Project Advocates Guide, which is clearly written for representation of tenants.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So.
Okay. one of the biggest differences between tax credit apartments and other subsidized, particularly HUD subsidized properties, is how the rent is calculated. It is not based on the tenant's income. It's based on the income of a fictional tenant whose income would be at exactly that percent of area median income. So we showed you the chart. So let me enlarge this a little bit. So I'm using Philadelphia here, somebody who is at 20% of area median income, and it's a one-person household. The income limit is $14,670. If you're a three-person, I'm going to put my glasses, it's 18,980, you know, and so on. So that's the starting point for calculating the rent. Let me just look at my notes in case I want to say something before I go to another chart. And I know that if you don't work in the housing world, you're not necessarily familiar with AMI because most programs use poverty limits. In the housing world, we don't use poverty limits. We use area median income. I'm going to skip ahead here to page 15. And yes, you will actually, here's the link for where you can print off copies of this guide in Spanish and English, but I also have hard copies that I will get to every participant on this call because I want to get them out of my garage. So these figures don't correspond with what I just showed you because we printed this guide a year ago and the figures do change every year. So using this link, which will take you to what I just showed you, that's important to make sure you're updated. And we're using the example for Philadelphia for reasons that had to do with our funding. But as you could see here, all the counties are listed.
Yeah. And Philadelphia should be the same as the 5-county area because it's the same metropolitan statistical area of, right?
Yeah.
Montgomery
Yeah.
County should be the same.
That 105.4, right?
Same with Chester, same with Delaware. Bucks.
So it's based on census numbers. HUD pulls them and does the metropolitan area and yeah, and then does these breakdowns. But PHFA takes it further because this is specifically for the low-income housing tax credit program. So they give you all of these divisions, and then I'll show you in a minute. They also, excuse me, calculate rent for you. Well, I'll show you that right now. I just have to move this off of my screen. So over here, they're calculating maximum rents for the different households, for the different area median incomes, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on, and for different size bedrooms. But I'm going to show you how they get to that. So we've got our income limits. We're going to, okay, 43.5 is the 50% area median income for a 3-person household, 43,500. That's the maximum somebody could have to qualify for that apartment for that 3-person household size. Affordable is 30% of income, right? That's standard across HUD programs. So first we're going to come up with what's the monthly, divide the 43.5 by 12 for a monthly income figure. 30% is $1,087. So that's going to be the rent for a 2-bedroom that's designated for people at 50% of area median income. And then there is a utility allowance. You may be familiar with that concept from public housing, from housing choice vouchers. So if the utilities are included in the rent, there is no utility allowance. If the tenant is paying their own utilities, then there's a whole chart with allowances calculated depending on the type of utility and the size of the unit. But not just 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3, but a 2-bedroom apartment uses less, it costs less to heat a 2-bedroom apartment than a 2-bedroom single-family house. So that's all calculated in utility allowances. And I believe they use the same utility allowance calculations that the Housing Authority produces for public housing. So the maximum rent would be $1,087 if, for instance, there's a $50 utility allowance. The maximum the tenant would pay in rent is $1,037. Let me see what else I want to show you. Whoops, show you here. So I'm going to go back now to page 8. All right, but that doesn't mean most people don't have exactly that amount of money. Right? They have a little bit less, and they can still qualify. Just like in market rate apartments, the manager will look to see that you have enough income. Usually using a formula that they're looking for 2.5 to 3 times the amount of rent in monthly income. So again, in this chart, we're talking about, well, we're giving examples of 3 different size apartments. We're looking at people at the 20% of AMI. And so let's just run through this. So we've calculated the rent based on 30%. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me go back here for a second. So I'm going to look at 20% AMI for a family of 3, for example. Okay, so 20% AMI for a 3-person household. Oh, I forgot. This is the 2022 limits, not the 2021. In last year, it would be $17,400. And you multiply that, you divide by 12 for a monthly, you multiply by 0.3, 30% to come up with $435. That's the monthly rent for this unit. You know, the calculations are different for different bedroom sizes. Obviously, the way it's done is by assuming a certain number of people per bedroom, per bedroom. So it's assumed that a 2-bedroom is going to have 3 people, and that's what the rent's based on. You could have 4, but then you luck out. A 1-bedroom, I think, is calculated for 2 people. I'd have to go back and do that math, but the calculations assume a certain number of people. So, and then this example includes a utility allowance. Here's the net rent that the tenant would pay. If we multiply that by 2.5 per month of 2.5, I didn't come up with a monthly, but your annual income would need to be 11,700. So that's the minimum. The 17,400 is the maximum. For this 3-person household, the 11,700 is the minimum that any size household is going to need for this apartment, which means that most tenants are going to pay more than 30% of their income for this apartment, unless you're exactly at that income level. You're going to be paying more than 30%. And so who qualifies? Anyone with up to should be a 17,400. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little confused here myself. It is a little confusing. So there are anybody up to, these are the income limits for different size households. And again, if you've got 2 parents and I guess 3 very young kids, maybe you could still get a 2-bedroom. Certainly 4 people, 2 parents in 1, or 2 people in 1 bedroom. I won't even say parents, 2 people in 1 bedroom, 2 people in another bedroom. And then I think there's a +1. So this is the maximum. You could actually earn more than that 17,400 and qualify if you're a 5-person household. You get into 6 people, you're not going to qualify for a 2-bedroom house. So then you're looking at a 3-bedroom. In the 3-bedroom, we went through that same calculation. This is the monthly rent, assuming a 50, the utility allowance. Multiply it by 2.5 and multiply by 12 for an annual income of 13,560. A one-person household will not qualify. Their income, their maximum income allowance is under the minimum required for this apartment. They also won't qualify because a one person is not going to get a 3-bedroom apartment. So to recap, the rents are set looking at a fictional tenant with an assumed family size, 3-person, at the maximum eligible income for that income level, for that for the 20% of area median income. You can earn less than that and qualify as long as you meet the, in this example, 2.5 times income. Some people, 2.5 times rent. Some managers will be looking for 3 times the rent, so fewer people will qualify. You could even be over it if your household size is larger than what was used to set that rent amount. The rent will vary depending on whether the owner designated that unit for people at 20% AMI, 40%, 60%, etc. And so you can have 2 identical apartments side by side, and the tenants in each are paying different amounts of rent. I'm going to take a breather there. I know this is very complicated, and let's take some questions. Any questions on that?
Yes, Cindy, I think you did a great job of going through that complicated. Let me just say, I just have 2 comments. One is, when I started doing this work, I was surprised at how much you could make up to 60% AMI to qualify for one of these apartments. So, I mean, it was, that was pleasantly surprising. But then when you look at Cindy's chart and the way she so eloquently explained it, there's a narrow band of what clients can earn to qualify because they have to have a minimum income. So, it's between, I mean, it's that. So, a lot of clients are disappointed. So, and this is just straight tax credit. There may be some tax credits that have additional subsidy, like a project-based Section 8 that allows tenants who earn less than 2.5 times the rent to live there. But the reason this works is because the demand is so huge. As we all know, there's such a shortage of affordable housing that even with this narrow income band, the owners of these developments can fill them with people, and their waiting lists are full. So it's a federal policy issue too, because the tax credit program, what does it do? It finances the development of housing, so it gives you the cost that you need to actually put the bricks and mortar up, and then pay your soft costs, pay your architect, your lawyer, that kind of thing. But it doesn't finance affordable rents. It doesn't give you a rental subsidy, the way the old the HUD 202 program or Section 811 came in. HUD would give you the money to build, and they would give you a subsidy. So, so these buildings are not cash cows. They do not throw off a lot of cash. And yeah, I mean, so those are just some general observations.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I will, sum up what Kim was saying. LIHTC apartments are not for very poor people. But that said, thank you for reminding me, Kim, if the tenant has a housing choice voucher, they may use it. And in fact, they cannot be turned down for that reason. They can be turned down for other reasons, but LIHTC owners must accept housing choice vouchers, in which case none of the income rules apply.
Right.
And also, as Kim said, some of these properties will have an allocation of project-based vouchers, which means that subsidy is attached to the unit, and that also then eliminates the need to go through all these income calculations. Yeah, the program, was designed for the developers. So let's see. Okay, I think that's it. We talked about utilities, and unless you have any other questions about rent, we'll move on.
All right. So, So as I mentioned before, one of the screenings that tax credit property managers will do will be a criminal background check. So what does that mean? Well, if you have a criminal history, you may or may not be able to get into LIHTC housing. We can tell you that a blanket policy that rejects anybody with any justice involvement does not comply with fair housing law. Particularly if it excludes protected classes, African Americans or others that's a clear violation of the Fair Housing Act. So what does that mean? A misdemeanor conviction, minor offenses, just an arrest, that shouldn't be the basis for excluding somebody from LIHTC housing. If it's a more serious conviction, a violent crime, or for drug manufacture, particularly in subsidized housing, that can be a major barrier to finding somebody in a LIHTC apartment. So generally speaking, property managers need to have be flexible about their criminal background policy so they don't violate fair housing law. They need to have individual exceptions and allow for to look at the facts and circumstances of everybody's particular record. So if you're an advocate for a client, you need to look at that and dig down. If you have somebody with a recent felony conviction, then unfortunately the only solution may be expungement or record sealing or in some cases pardon. And there is a movement, a clean slate movement that can help with that, but that might be the only solution. Or to find a development that actually has units for returning citizens. So if you believe your client was wrongly denied because of a minor conviction, then you should definitely contact your legal services. I mean, you guys are legal services, a lot of you on the call, or you can look at the fair housing resources that we can show you at the back of the guide. The Fair Housing Center, the Equality Center. I think I can't remember the exact name of it. It's in the back of the guide. They have a really great resource for the eastern half of the state on fair housing law and where you can file complaints and that kind of thing. So do we have any questions on convictions? I mean, I know Laura Schwartz is an attorney in our office in regional housing who has done a lot of work working with landlords on revising their criminal history background check policies. And making sure people are aware that they're violating federal law if they have a blanket policy excluding people. So I put a plug in for Laura. If nobody has questions about the criminal history, then let's talk about the student rules. Can I qualify if I'm a full-time student? Let's see. Well, so it's basically laid out here in the guide. You can be a full-time student and live in LIHTC housing if you fall within one of these exceptions. Generally speaking, you can't unless you fall in with an exception. So basically if your household, two people are married and they file a joint federal tax return and they're both full-time students, you can qualify. If you're a student receiving temporary assistance for needy families, you can qualify. If you have any kind of foster care in assistance or involvement, you can qualify. If you're a single parent living with minor children, you can qualify. But these are small exceptions. Generally speaking, you wouldn't qualify because Congress didn't create this to create for student housing. It created it for affordable housing for families and individuals. So those are the student rules. You should be aware of that. Is this, I guess it's still me, right, Cindy?
Yep.
So if I need an accessible unit, so PHFA, it has a very detailed accessible unit policy that that tax credit owners need to follow. A couple of years ago, they did a study and they found that even though PHFA was requiring developers to create a certain number of accessible units and units for the hearing impaired and the visually impaired, a lot of times those units weren't being filled with people that needed the accessibility features of them. So they got real serious and required developers to certify that they're complying with their policy. But essentially, developers have to go show PHFA that they're advertising the units with agencies that serve these populations, that they need to keep the unit open for 30 days in order to fill it with somebody that needs the accessibility feature. If they can't find someone within 30 days, then they need to either contact somebody at PHFA or fill it with a family or a person that doesn't need the accessibility features. But that person has to sign a lease addendum that says they'll agree to move within the building if someone else comes along off the waiting list that needs the accessibility features of the apartment they're in. So there's also, if you have a tenant or a person that needs accessibility features and keeps getting turned down because there are no apartments available, you can ask to be put on a special wait list for each development for when an accessible unit opens. That's part of the PHFA policy as well. So there's the accessibility. Let's talk about credit checks. We mentioned that the landlord will do a credit check. Perfect credit isn't necessary, but a lot of times, so your credit score doesn't have to be in the high 700s or 800s, but at the same time, landlords are going to be looking at prior evictions, and they're going to want to see evidence that you've paid past due rent, those kinds of things. Also, utility shutoffs. They'll want to, if a tenant has a history of utility shutoffs, they'll want to see that that they'll be able to open up another utility account, especially if the landlord is not paying the utilities, the tenants are, and they'll have to open up account. So that's something you'll have to work through. I guess a lot of times you can refer clients to credit counselors to help clean that up, to get their credit in order so that they'll pass the credit check. This is also one of those things that should be an individual case by case basis. If you have a client with some issues on their credit, and they might need help explaining that in order for their application to be approved. So that's where an advocate can really be helpful at the application stage. Okay, any questions about that? If a tenant is rejected and it's not clear why they're rejected, the property manager should provide them with a written explanation of why. And if there's questions about whether that rejection was proper, you need to look at the tenant selection plan, get a copy of that from the manager to make sure that that's being applied fairly to your client. And there should be a process for appealing it. I mean, it's not a formal process, but there should be some opportunity to appeal some kind of a rejection like that. A landlord needs to do that. A property owner needs to do that. And if that's not happening, then PHFA is going to be really interested in that. So if this is being done improperly, they should get legal representation and that kind of thing. Let's see. There are special protections for survivors, and that's for victims of domestic violence in LIHTC housing. That's it's specifically set out in the lease addendum that PHFA requires to be put on every LIHTC lease. So if you have been a victim, or if you're representing someone that has been a victim of domestic violence and they were evicted from their last place because, too many calls from the police or because of an abusive partner, that can't be a reason to reject somebody's application or to evict someone, really. So that's another special protection you should be aware of. Okay.
Any questions on any of that?
Yeah.
Okay, a few more things to consider. So, immigrants without lawful status. There's nothing in the LIHTC rules that prohibit people from living, from undocumented people from living in LIHTC. But particularly in Pennsylvania, and I say that for reasons that have to do with how one finances a development, the building of the development. In Pennsylvania, almost every LIHTC development has other funding in it as well. Often community development block grant, which is a HUD program that carry restrictions on citizenship or legal status. Certainly housing choice vouchers, similar to public housing, the same rules could apply to a mixed family. That is where one person does not have legal status, but another person does, and the subsidy could be prorated. So it does get more complicated than just saying LIHTC doesn't prohibit. You are likely to see other sources of funding. And actually, I noticed when we were looking at, let me quickly go back, share, come on, to my online, I think it was this. I'm going to go back. Oh no, sorry. Now I remember where it was. It's not there. Income limits. Oh, never mind. It was the list of apartments in for here, Philadelphia, list of apartments. So it shows you funding sources, right? This one, amazingly, they're only, these could just be, are these just PHFA funding sources? Yeah, this is not showing you CDBG or foundation support or anything like that. Okay, so never mind. But anyway, that is a complication in terms of legal status. So waiting lists, we mentioned before, most of these, excuse me a second. Most of these developments have waiting lists. Waiting lists get complicated also because you've got different apartments designated for different income groups. Right? So there may actually be 5 different waiting lists. A waiting list for the 20% AMI units, and a waiting list for the 60%, and a waiting list for people with disabilities. It's really important to keep in touch with the manager, because not only you want to keep checking, is there an opening? Hopefully they'll notify you when you get to the top of the list, but you want to keep checking. But if there's any change in the family, certainly a change of address, managers often will purge the waiting lists every year, and they'll do that by sending out a letter to the applicant. If you don't respond, then your name can be dropped from the list. So if your address changes, definitely let the manager know. If your income changes, let the manager know. If your family size changes, let the manager know, because you may qualify for a different unit. You may be placed on a different waiting list. Okay, any questions on what we just covered? All right, Kim, it's back to you.
Sure.
What to expect?
Okay, so once you're in the property, then obviously there's going to be recertification after you go through the initial recertification. Well, there may be house rules which which would be in the lease, but after initial certification, many times landlords will have to do a recertification every year. So I think Cindy mentioned the big things about that. Recertification, tenants will have to provide income for everybody, every adult in the household, whether the family size, the household size has changed. As you could tell, based on all those charts, the rent is based on, and the maximum income is based on your household size. So that's an important thing to know. The full-time student status of people in the household is another thing because of the full-time student roles. And then also if there are changes in your assets. This recertification would happen really only once a year. And if you don't respond, if the client doesn't respond, that can be good cause for eviction. So it's important to make sure that recertification happens. If someone in the household, an adult in the household, does not have income, they may be asked to submit a certification of zero income, and there's a link to PHFA's form for that. One interesting thing about the LIHTC program is that if your income just happens to go up above the maximum, that can't be a loan basis to evict you. So the worst case scenario would be that the landlord raises your rent. So technically speaking, you could get a major promotion and earn more than the maximum and still be allowed to stay in the unit. It gets complicated when there's other funding sources involved. For example, if there's a voucher or something, or some other income requirements. But generally speaking, you can't be evicted just because you're over income. So you could potentially live there for the rest of your life. There's a special rule called the next available unit rule, and it varies depending on whether the building is 100% affordable or is a mixed income with some market rate in there. But that's the rule that basically allows people to stay in units if they're over income. Okay.
I just want to emphasize that and clarify, because somebody in a different presentation asked, where is that written? There is actually no right of the tenant to remain. What it is a rule that does not penalize the landlord in the event the tenant's income goes up. And therefore, it's been concluded that it's not good cause for eviction because there's no penalty to the landlord.
Right, and there is IRS guidance on that, and I can, if anybody wants to get into the weeds of that, feel free to contact me, and I can provide you with those, citations. Now, so the next page changes. So if obviously Cindy mentioned this already, if someone moves in with you, that's a change that needs to be reported immediately. Because if it's not, it can be the basis to evict someone. Let's see, change in household size. If you're expecting the birth of a child, is another thing to report immediately. If you're generally speaking, if your income is going to go up or go down, that's not going to, unlike a Section 8 voucher, that's not going to change the amount of rent you pay. But significant changes in your income might qualify you for different apartments. So that's something you should contact the manager about to see if there are other units within the apartment that you might qualify for.
Kim, let me ask you a question about that. If somebody drops from 50% AMI to 40, and this particular development does have apartments designated that way, do they have to physically move, or can the management redesignate the apartment?
The management can redesignate the apartment, I think, generally speaking, yes. I think that's true. I mean, unless there's some special rule, but generally they can be floating. That's my understanding. Yeah. So you don't have to physically move. You can just be redesignated. I think that's kind of rare, but it's theoretically possible. Yeah. Is that your understanding, Cindy? I mean,
I don't know, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, I knew that there was the ability, to redesignate, but it gets complicated, I would assume, if you're full and all of your apartments in each category are already full, then redesignating might be hard because it throws the balance off.
That's true. So talk about getting into the weeds. I mean, and this is, this is get into the fine minutia of tax credit compliance, which what these property managers are supposed to specialize in. But yeah, if you look at the declaration of restricted covenants, that should tell you, that's basically recorded like a deed against the property. That should tell you what, the minimum units at 50% and 40%. That's what the landlord has promised to PHFA. There's also, other funding sources are going to overlap on top of that, and also have their own requirements. But that's something that it's really talk about the weeds. Yes.
Thank you.
Anymore, but yeah. So moving, that's another thing to think about. When you move apartments, if it's within the same building, you don't have to go through all the recertification. If you move buildings, like for example, someone mentioned this building that's being converted because it's being rehabbed and people are moving, that could be a situation where you might have to completely recertify, like when you're initially applying, and the certification there tends to be a lot more rigorous. But I know there are rules about can I maybe change the apartments. Okay, so and I wonder about this situation with this conversion and whether all the rules are being followed and whether the tenants' rights are being protected. But let me go back to my script, which is, okay, can I be made to change apartments? Well, I mentioned one instance where you can be made to change is if you're in an accessible unit and you don't need the accessibility features, you can be made to move to another unit to make room for somebody that does need the accessibility features. I mean, if there are no other available units, then that's not going to happen. So that's one situation where you could be asked to move within a tax credit property. Let's see, another circumstance is if they're renovating the building. So, and so this is where, I have questions about whether these tenants are being properly treated or not. And, whether the landlord is using the end of the 30-year compliance period and the renovation as a pretext for moving people sooner than the 3 years. So that's something I think that needs to be looked into. And I can be a resource after this after this call if that's an issue for that particular circumstance. Yeah, I mean, so it is, a lot of times after the, let me step back for a second. So when developers create these apartments, there's usually two compliance periods. One is the 15-year compliance period, which is when the tax credit rules need to be followed. And then there's the extended use period, which is the 30-year, usually now it's 40 years, where the building has to remain low income. So after the end of the 15-year compliance period, what typically happens is the for-profit investor that gave you, the equity to build the building usually exits, and ownership in some way transfers. Sometimes that may be not be visible to the general public. It'll just be a transfer of a limited partnership interest that nobody really sees. But so after the end of that 15-year compliance period, a lot of these buildings need a facelift, and a lot of times owners will go in and want to renovate and go in for additional tax credits to upgrade the apartments and things like that. And so that will often happen at the end of 15 years, even though the 30-year, and that will tack on more time at the end of the 30-year compliance period, because they'll have to go and resyndicate, maybe get new tax credits from PHFA and make the affordability period even longer. So that's that's a circumstance that happens a lot, and there are rules about how you move tenants, and there are rules about relocation and that are beyond the scope of this presentation today. So just keep that in mind. Okay. I guess now I'm turning back to you, Cindy.
Okay. So yeah, we're just about wrapping up here. evictions, of course, are always a concern to tenants. LIHTC apartments are covered by good cause eviction requirements. You may be, but of course, in Pennsylvania, there's no good cause for privately owned market rate apartments. LIHTC is covered by good cause. What's good cause? We can't really say because it's really very specific to the situation. The rules do say serious and repeated violation. Does that mean it has to be both serious and repeated? Well, that's also not clear. My guess is that if you pull a gun on someone, it's probably serious enough that it doesn't have to be repeated to be a violation. On the other hand, if you pay your rent late once, that's probably not serious enough to be good cause. I will note for the lawyers, we did a presentation at a conference and had a legal aid lawyer on the panel who said that he will often see eviction notices that don't specify good cause. And the landlord waits until he gets to court to explain what the good cause is. And, it's debatable as to whether that's allowable, but that is a practice. If, if you deal with those situations, I'll refer you to him after the webinar. Some important things to keep in mind, as Kim emphasized, you cannot be evicted just because your rent goes up. You have to be income eligible when you move in, but I don't mean rent, your income goes up. End of lease term is not good cause. So that's sort of definition of good cause, I guess, of a good cause protection. All right, we did these pages. Kim, you just want to mention the fair housing?
Sure. Yeah. So this talks about the fair housing resources in our state. There's a link to the local legal aid programs, which you guys are all familiar with. There's also a good the Housing Equality Center of Pennsylvania has a really good plain English guide that lays out what fair housing law is and who's protected and who isn't, and what some of the exceptions are, and where you can file complaints if you're being discriminated against. There's also, keep in mind that there's the federal fair housing law, but there's also protections at the state and the local level that may be different. Usually they're more protective. So if you're not a protected class at the federal level, you might be protected by a local statute. So these are all great links for more information about fair housing.
I'm going to go back up here for a moment. I know that the folks on this webinar are basically in the Philadelphia and suburban areas, but I just, so there are counties, like between the Housing Equality Center and the Fair Housing Law Center, covers a lot of counties, and then these other few, but not every county in the state. On listserv that I'm on, I just saw a question posted about someone who needs fair housing assistance in Tioga County. And the response from the Fair Housing Law Center was that they have permission from HUD to assist people in counties that don't have fair housing centers. So they're a really good resource. And yeah, that's it. That's us. So please, we have a few minutes. I know we've been talking at you a long time, and this is very, very complicated. Unmute yourself if you have questions, and actually I'll stop sharing. All right, again, there's a link. If this didn't go out, I think this went out in the announcement, the links to the guide in both English and Spanish, and announcement for the webinar. I do have hard copies that I would like to get to each of you. We have your email. I'll be contacting you about getting guides to you if you want them. So get them out of my garage. Any questions? Well, thank you all for your attention. You know where to find us if something comes up.